Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the American summer of 1947. The war is over. The soldiers are home. The nation is exhaling, catching its breath after years of sacrifice, rationing, and fear. Victory gardens are growing weeds. Ration books are gathering dust in kitchen drawers. The boys who stormed Normandy and Okinawa are trying to remember how to be civilians again. The nuclear age has just begun with a blinding flash over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a power so terrifying that even its creators weren't sure it should exist. Jet engines are barely a year old, marvels of engineering that can push an aircraft past 500 miles per hour. Radar, the miracle technology that helped win the Battle of Britain, is still a wonder to most people. The world is changing faster than anyone can keep up with.
And then, in that strange electric space between wartime secrecy and peacetime wonder, between the old world and the new, something begins appearing in the skies over the American West. Something that doesn't fit into any category. Something that the most powerful military on Earth cannot identify. Tonight, we're going back to the beginning. Not to the conspiracy theories, not to the folklore and the grainy photographs and the breathless television specials. We're going back to the actual documents. Declassified United States military and federal investigation reports drawn from the files of Project Blue Book, the FBI, and other government agencies. These are the first chapters of America's official encounter with the unidentified. These are the reports that were filed by officers and agents who were told to investigate and who discovered that some things simply could not be explained. 3 stories, 3 incidents, each one documented by the United States government itself. The first takes us to a dusty airfield in the Mojave Desert in the sweltering heat of July 1947. The very first incident investigated by what would become the most famous UFO project in American history. The second plunges us into a Kansas farmyard on a cold February evening, where a brave or terrified farmer came face to face with something that left scorched earth and a mystery that the best astronomers in the country couldn't solve. And the third? The third is barely 2 years old. An FBI field report from a restricted military facility written by a senior official with 15 years of experience who should have been able to identify anything in the sky. Someone who couldn't. So settle in, get comfortable, subscribe if you haven't already, hit that bell, and let's go back to where it all began. July 8, 1947. Just 9 days after Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting over Mount Rainier in Washington state, the event that introduced the term flying saucer to the American vocabulary, the moment when the modern UFO era truly began, and just 2 weeks after the Roswell incident made headlines in a New Mexico newspaper before being swiftly retracted by the military, replaced with the mundane explanation of a weather balloon. The place is Muroc Air Field. If that name doesn't ring a bell, you might know it by its modern name, Edwards Air Force Base. The place where Chuck Yeager would break the sound barrier later that same year in the Bell X-1, the most famous test flight facility in the world, the runway where the space shuttle would one day land. But in July of 1947, it was still Muroc, a sun-bleached, wind-scoured military installation in the high desert of California, surrounded by dry lake beds and scrub brush and the shimmering heat haze of the Mojave, where the Army Air Forces tested experimental aircraft under the endless, cloudless, merciless sky. This was where the future of American aviation was being built. Test pilots pushed the boundaries of speed and altitude every day. New aircraft designs arrived regularly, some conventional, some radical, some so secret that only a handful of people on the base knew they existed. The personnel at Muroc were accustomed to seeing unusual aircraft. It was literally their job. At approximately 9:30 in the morning, First Lieutenant Joseph C. McHenry, the base's billeting officer, the officer responsible for housing and quarters, stepped out of the post exchange, the base's convenience store. The air was already hot and dry, the kind of desert heat that makes the horizon shimmer. The sky was clear and blue, a vast dome of emptiness stretching from the Sierra Nevada to the Coast Ranges. McHenry was not a man prone to fantasy. He was an officer at one of America's most important military installations, a place where test pilots pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the air every single day. He knew what aircraft looked like. He knew how they moved against the sky. He knew the sounds they made, the whine of jets, the drone of propellers, the distinctive profiles of fighters and bombers and experimental craft. And when he heard what sounded like aircraft in the traffic pattern above the base, he did what any officer would do. He looked up. What he saw made him stop walking. Two objects, silver, either disc-like or spherical. The exact shape was difficult to determine at that distance and angle, but the reflective glint of metal was unmistakable against the blue desert sky. They were moving at approximately 300 miles per hour, a speed that, in 1947, was reserved for the fastest experimental aircraft in the world. At an altitude of roughly 8,000 feet, heading on a bearing of 320 degrees, due north, toward the town of Mojave and the empty desert beyond. These were not birds. 300 miles per hour. These were not balloons. Balloons don't travel at 300 miles per hour, and they don't gleam like metal. And here is the detail that elevates this sighting above the ordinary. They were moving against the wind. The prevailing winds at that altitude were coming from the north. The objects were moving north. They were flying directly into the wind, which meant they were under power, under control, and generating their own thrust. In 1947, only a handful of experimental jet aircraft in the world could reach 300 miles per hour, and none of them looked like silver discs. McHenry, thinking clearly under pressure, called for witnesses. He wasn't going to see this alone, not with something this unusual, this fast, this clearly metallic. 3 people responded immediately. Staff Sergeant Gerald E. Nauman, Technical Sergeant Joseph Ruvalo, and a civilian employee, Miss Jeanette Marie Scott.
All 4 of them looked up. All 4 of them saw the same thing. Silver, metallic objects moving against the wind at high speed across the desert sky. 4 pairs of eyes, 4 independent witnesses, 1 consistent description. McHenry, thinking like an officer, thinking like someone who understood that extraordinary observations required extraordinary corroboration, wanted even more witnesses. He tried to locate medical officers on the base who could serve as additional independent observers, people with no connection to the sighting, no stake in the outcome, whose professional training would allow them to assess what they were seeing with clinical objectivity. But by the time the medical officers arrived at the observation point, the original 2 objects had vanished. They had crossed the sky and disappeared to the northwest, leaving behind nothing but the clear blue emptiness of the Mojave sky. Almost empty.
Because 2 of the witnesses, the same people who had watched the original objects disappear, looked up one more time. And there it was. A 3rd object. Another silver disk or sphere at approximately the same altitude of 8,000 feet, directly over the north end of the airfield. Hovering. Watching. As if it had been there all along, waiting to be noticed. And this one was doing something. It was performing tight circles above the base, not gentle banking turns, not the wide, lazy arcs of a conventional aircraft in a holding pattern following standard procedure and air traffic control instructions. These were tight, rapid, aggressive circles, the kind of maneuver that the official report would later describe with a phrase that carries the weight of every aviation expert who reviewed it. Performed too tight a circle to be any type of known aircraft. Read that again. At Muroc Air Field, where the most advanced experimental aircraft in the American arsenal were tested every day, the official evaluation was that this object was performing maneuvers that no known aircraft could perform. Not a prototype, not a secret project, not anything in the American inventory or any other nation's inventory. Something beyond the known capabilities of 1947 aviation. 5 out of the 7 personnel present that morning saw this object. 5 trained military and civilian personnel at one of America's premier test flight facilities watching something perform impossible turns over the desert. The 2 who didn't see it were the medical officers, the ones McHenry had gone to fetch, the ones who arrived just a few minutes too late. The official evaluation in the file? Confirmed by other sources. That's it. No explanation, no resolution, no prosaic answer neatly typed into the identification field. Just confirmation that the sighting was real, documented, corroborated, and unexplained. And here's the detail that gives this story its historical weight. The detail that makes it more than just another sighting report from the late 1940s. This was incident number 1 in the files that would eventually become Project Blue Book, the United States Air Force's official, systematic, comprehensive investigation into unidentified flying objects. The very first case file. The very first page of the most extensive UFO investigation program in American history. July 8, 1947. Muroc Air Field. A hot summer morning. 2 silver disks, then a third, performing impossible turns over the desert while trained military personnel stood on the ground and watched. This is where the story starts. Right here, with silver objects over a desert airfield in the same summer that changed the world. 7 months later, February 18, 1948. The flying saucer craze is in full swing across America. Newspapers from coast to coast are filled with reports of strange objects in the sky. The Air Force is scrambling to keep up, investigating reports as fast as they come in, trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, the real from the imagined. But what happened on this cold February evening in the Plains states would not be a typical sighting. This would not be a distant light in the sky. This would be a close encounter, a term that wouldn't even be coined for another 27 years, until a young astrophysicist named J. Allen Hynek needed a way to categorize exactly this kind of event. The location is Norcatur, Kansas. Incident number 101 in the Blue Book files. A case file number that sounds bureaucratic and forgettable, but what's inside that file is anything but. Reports had been coming in for hours from across multiple states. Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Colorado, Nebraska, of something streaking across the evening sky. Something bright, something fast. Something that at first glance looked like it might be a meteor. The reports were consistent enough that astronomers took notice, and the Air Force began assembling what it knew. But in the small farming community of Stockton, Kansas, a man named Leland Salmons would provide testimony that turned this incident into something far stranger than a space rock burning up in the atmosphere. Something that no astronomer could explain. Something that left physical evidence and a lasting impression on a man who had the courage, or the misfortune, to come face to face with it. Salmons was a farmer. It was about 5 o'clock in the evening, the sun low in the winter sky, the Kansas plains stretching flat and brown to every horizon. He was at home, going about the ordinary rhythms of a February day on a farm, the kind of day that should have been unremarkable, forgettable, no different from the thousands of days that came before it. But then the animals began to behave strangely. The pheasants, wild birds that would normally be settling quietly into their roosts for the evening, were raising a tremendous disturbance, squawking, flapping, bursting from cover in agitated waves. They were scared. Something had alarmed them profoundly, something they could sense, but the farmer could not yet see. And the chickens, every chicken on the property, without exception, were rushing toward the coop, not wandering, not pecking their way casually in the direction of shelter, rushing, running, fleeing something with the blind, desperate instinct of prey animals that know in their bones that a predator is near. Salmons looked up. Something was hovering above his house. Then it lowered, drifting down like a leaf falling from a tree, except this leaf was on fire, and it was descending with purpose, settling over the north end of the property, coming closer, getting bigger, becoming more real with every passing second. And Leland Salmons did something that most of us would never, ever do, something that speaks to either extraordinary courage or the irresistible pull of curiosity in the face of the impossible. He ran toward it. The object descended until it was at his level, roughly 6 feet off the ground, face to face, if you will, close enough to touch, close enough to feel the heat, close enough that the pipe protruding from its back end was pointing directly at his midsection. And what Salmons described in his official testimony, his words recorded by investigators filed in the archives of the United States Air Force, is one of the most vivid, most visceral close encounter accounts in the entire Blue Book collection. Just wobbled around for an instant, fire belching out of it and sucking back in. It was approximately 5 feet long, shaped like a funnel, wide at one end, narrow at the other. A pipe protruded from the back end of the object, extending outward like a tail or an exhaust. And that pipe, in Salmons' own words, was sticking right at my belly. 6 feet away, at eye level, a pipe pointing at his midsection, fire belching and sucking back in a rhythmic mechanical pulse, like breathing, like a heartbeat, like a machine doing something biological. The object wobbled. It hung there impossibly 6 feet from the face of a Kansas farmer, belching fire in and out like some mechanical lung, its funnel shape silhouetted against the darkening February sky. And then, sparks. A shower of sparks erupted from the object. The fire intensified, burning brighter and hotter, the way a fuse burns brighter in the final seconds before it reaches the powder. And then the object accelerated, not gradually, not like a vehicle picking up speed on a highway, but instantly, violently, shooting off to the northwest at tremendous speed, faster than anything Salmons had ever seen move. Salmon's wife, who had been inside the house and heard the commotion, the animal sounds, the fire, the wobble of something mechanical hovering over their home, came outside. They both stood in the yard and watched it go, a trail of smoke marking its path across the darkening Kansas sky, a white ribbon unraveling against the purple of twilight. About 40 seconds later, an explosion. A massive detonation ripped through the sky above them. Not a distant rumble, not a muffled pop. A full, concussive explosion that shook the air and sent a column of smoke billowing outward, visible for miles in every direction across the flat Kansas plains. Something had detonated in the upper atmosphere with enough force to register like a bomb. In the days that followed, a piece of meteorite weighing 109 pounds was excavated from the area. A large fragment of extraterrestrial rock embedded in the Kansas earth. The Air Force and the press would eventually file this incident under meteor and move on, as they had done with so many other reports. Case closed. Natural phenomenon. Nothing to see here. But there were problems with that explanation. Serious problems that the official file acknowledges, even if the final classification papers over them. A meteor does not hover 6 feet above a farmhouse. A meteor does not have a funnel shape with a pipe protruding from its back. A meteor does not belch fire and then suck it back in a rhythmic mechanical pulse. A meteor does not wobble at face level and point a pipe at a man's belly. A meteor does not shower sparks, intensify like a burning fuse, and then accelerate horizontally across the sky, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. A meteor falls. It does not hover. It does not aim. It does not accelerate under power. Astronomers at the Chamberlain Observatory in Denver, Colorado, one of the premier astronomical institutions in the region, staffed by scientists who had spent their careers studying the objects that fall from space, examined the reports and the recovered fragment, and they were unable to explain the aerial explosion. The meteorite fragment was real, a piece of rock from beyond the Earth, but the behavior described by Leland Salmons and documented in the official Air Force file did not match the behavior of any known natural phenomenon. The meteorite existed, but it was not the whole story. Something landed in a Kansas farmyard that February evening. Something that looked like a funnel, belched fire, pointed a pipe at a brave or terrified farmer standing 6 feet away, and then took off across the sky before detonating above the plains with enough force to shake the ground and fill the sky with smoke. And the United States Air Force, after investigating, could not say what it was. Now we jump forward, far forward, past the Cold War, past the decades of secrecy and denial, past the disbanding of Project Blue Book in 1969, past the long years when the government officially said there was nothing to investigate and nothing to see. All the way to September 2023. Because the encounters didn't stop. They never stopped. The documents didn't stop. The reports kept coming, decade after decade, year after year, month after month. And the people filing them were not civilians with shaky cameras. They were military professionals, intelligence officers, people with security clearances and years of training, people who knew what belonged in the sky and what didn't. This final story is drawn from an FBI FD 302 report, the standard form used by bureau agents to document witness interviews. It's the same form used to record testimony in federal criminal investigations. It carries the weight of federal documentation. It was obtained through disclosure processes and released to the public as part of the ongoing push for transparency around unidentified aerial phenomena. The witness is described in the report as a senior military official with 15 years of experience in the United States military. 15 years. This is not someone who stepped onto a base for the first time and mistook a helicopter for a spaceship. This is not a civilian looking at the sky with untrained eyes. This is someone who has spent a decade and a half inside the American military apparatus. Someone who has held positions of responsibility, who has been entrusted with classified information, who has worked alongside and above the most advanced military aircraft and drone systems in the world. Someone who understands what does and does not belong in the sky above a restricted military facility. The setting is a restricted military installation, the name of which is redacted in the released document, its location classified, its purpose undisclosed. The time is between 7:15 and 7:30 in the morning. Early, the sun still low on the horizon, the sky brightening but not yet fully lit. Our witness is driving to a test site, accompanied by contractors in a second vehicle behind them, heading toward the facility's entry gate. A routine morning, a routine drive. And then the gate malfunctions. It opens slightly, just a crack, barely enough to see through, and then closes. They try again. Same result. A third attempt fails. The gate opens a few inches, hesitates, and slides shut again. On the fourth try, the gate finally opens wide enough for the vehicles to drive through. Annoying, unusual, but gates malfunction. It happens. The witness drives forward, passing through the gate, and while driving through, perhaps glancing up instinctively at the sound of the malfunctioning gate, perhaps drawn by some instinct that defies rational explanation, the witness looks up, and the world stops. Above them, slowly moving from east to west, almost hovering, drifting with the deliberate, unhurried pace of something that has nowhere to be and all the time in the world, is an object unlike anything this 15-year military veteran has ever encountered. Not in classified briefings, not in operational theaters, not in test flight programs, not in 15 years of dedicated military service. It is cigar-shaped, an elongated form like a cylinder, smooth, symmetrical, and unmistakably manufactured. On its eastern end is a light of such intense brightness that the witness compares it to looking directly into the sun. Not a reflection, not a glint. A light source of such overwhelming luminosity that it rivaled the sun itself, burning from one end of the object like a torch. The body of the object is a metallic bronze color, a warm, lustrous metallic sheen that reflects the early morning light in a way that suggests polished metal, finished to a degree that no visible rivets, seams, or panel lines are apparent. The size is staggering. Based on the witness's military experience with various aircraft, the mental measuring stick that 15 years of service provides, the object is estimated to be the length of 2 to 3 Black Hawk helicopters placed nose to tail. A Black Hawk is 65 feet long. 2 to 3 of them would put this object at roughly 130 to 200 feet in length. Its width is approximately 1.5 Black Hawks, roughly 100 feet across. An object the size of a mid-rise building hovering silently above a restricted military facility in the early morning light. And it is completely silent. No engine noise, no rotor wash, no jet exhaust, no vibration in the air, no hum of turbines, no whistle of wind across surfaces. An object the size of a building drifting through the atmosphere, producing no sound whatsoever. In a world where every aircraft, every drone, every helicopter generates noise, where the physics of displacement demand that something this large moving through air must produce acoustic signatures, this object was silent as a shadow. The witness watches for 5 to 10 seconds. The object is slowly moving east to west, almost hovering, taking its time. And then the object vanishes. Not accelerates away in a burst of speed, not flies over the horizon, not fades behind a cloud. It simply is there. And then it is not. The sky where it had been moments before is empty. Clear blue. No clouds, no contrails, no distortion, no trace. As if it had never existed at all. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting, and even more credible. The co-worker driving the second vehicle, the one that had been following behind, a woman with her own 15 years of military experience, saw it too. She had spent her career working with and around military aircraft, and in the FBI report, she stated that she had seen most U.S. military aircraft and drones over the course of her 15 years of service. She knew the inventory, she knew the profiles, she knew the sounds and the silhouettes. Her assessment of what she saw? Never seen anything like it. Not a prototype, not a classified program, not anything she had ever been briefed on, ever seen on a flight line, ever watched cross a restricted military airspace. Something completely outside her 15 years of experience. And then she said something that chills me every time I read it. Something that was recorded by the FBI agent on the FD 302 form, written in the flat procedural language of federal documentation and preserved in the permanent record. According to the report, she felt, instinctively, intuitively, in a way that went beyond rational analysis, that it left when it saw them. Think about that statement. Really think about it. Not that the object left because it had somewhere to be, not that it was obscured by clouds or haze, not that it accelerated beyond visual range in a burst of speed, that it left when it saw them, as if it was aware, as if it was observing, as if it was watching the gate, watching the vehicles, watching the people, and then, at the moment it was observed in return, it chose to disappear, as if observation was a two-way street and the object had been the observer first. The woman would not have reported the incident on her own. She told the FBI agent, in terms that are recorded in the report, that she would not have come forward if she had been alone, because her colleagues would make fun of her, because she would not be taken seriously, because the stigma of reporting something like this, even for a senior military professional with 15 years of service, is so powerful that it overrides duty, overrides documentation, overrides the basic human need to say, I saw something and I don't know what it was. It was only because multiple witnesses corroborated the sighting, because two experienced professionals saw the same thing at the same time, that the report was filed at all. Let me say that again, because this might be the most important detail in the entire report. A senior military official with 15 years of experience would not have reported this on her own because she feared ridicule from her own colleagues. In 2023, at a restricted military facility in the United States of America, after decades of official investigations, congressional hearings, and government acknowledgments that unidentified aerial phenomena are real
and worthy of study. The stigma persists. The social cost of reporting persists. The silence persists. And the question we're left with, the question that should haunt anyone who reads these reports, is this: how many encounters like this one have gone unreported? How many times has a witness seen something extraordinary and chosen silence over mockery? How many FD 302 forms were never filed? How many gate malfunctions were never connected to what appeared in the sky above them? A cigar-shaped object, metallic bronze, the size of a small building, completely silent, hovering over a restricted military facility in the early morning light, and then simply gone, as if it had never been there at all. Except it had been there, and two experienced military professionals saw it, and an FBI agent wrote it down, and now it sits in a file, part of the growing, accumulating record of encounters that the United States government has been documenting, quietly, reluctantly, methodically, for nearly 80 years. 3 stories, 3 moments that define the beginning of America's relationship with the unexplained. From the very first incident investigated by Project Blue Book in July of 1947, silver discs performing impossible turns over a desert airfield where the future of aviation was being built, to a Kansas farmyard where a farmer came face to face with a funnel-shaped object that defied every natural explanation the Air Force could offer, to a restricted military gate in 2023, where 2 seasoned professionals watched something the size of a building silently vanish into a clear sky. These are the documents. These are the witnesses. These are the moments when ordinary people, soldiers, pilots, farmers, military officials, looked up and saw something that didn't fit into any category they knew, something that their training, their experience, their understanding of the world could not explain. If you've made it this far, you're one of us. You understand that these stories matter, not because they prove anything, but because they document something real, something that happened, something that the most powerful government in the world investigated and could not explain. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, ring the bell. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be told, not as entertainment, but as history. Government history. Documented history. History that someone once tried to lock in a filing cabinet, hoping the world would forget. Next time, we're going deep into the Cold War. 3 more encounters, 3 more declassified files. From the jungles of Papua New Guinea, where an entire nation watched the sky in fear, to the frozen steppes of Kazakhstan, where a Boeing 747 crew witnessed something perform maneuvers that should have been impossible, and left contrails at an altitude where contrails shouldn't exist. And finally, to a Soviet weapons facility where something appeared in the sky that no one could explain. Those files are waiting, and they're even stranger than what you heard tonight. Until then, as always,